Let's get back to one of our top stories, the ongoing U.S.-China trade fight. Joining us for more, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. You've got so much on your plate that we just were talking about, Governor. I mean, we might as well continue the conversation. Do you have can you see into the future and tell us whether this ends, how we want this to end, and how it's likely to end over in Hong Kong?
Well, first on Hong Kong, I think it's more of a moral issue even than a trade issue, although the two go hand in hand in the sense that I think we can get to a good deal with China. Remember, a year plus ago when the G7 was meeting up in Canada, the president at the time talked about wanting to get to a point where there's no tariffs. I think if you look at Canada and Mexico, people thought there was no way. In fact, a lot of people thought they were going to team up in the negotiations against the United States. Then they thought it was going to peel off one or the other. Now, assuming the Congress passes it, I think we're going to have a very good trade deal, a much better trade deal than NAFTA. And so I think we can get there with China. But when it comes to Hong Kong, I think it's a moral imperative. This is one of those moments like when Ronald Reagan stood at the Berlin Wall and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This is one of those moments where it's a gut check for America, and it ties to trade because if we can't trust China to fulfill the promises they made for legitimate elections and legitimate government in Hong Kong, then how can you trust them to fulfill the commitments they might make for the trade? So the two go hand in hand.
You are honorary chairman of Growing America, of a group that's looking at even more tax cuts. Is that right? And honorary, are you involved in the inner workings of exactly what you come up with? And I assume that you are. Can you just describe what you think we need to do, even if the economy is strong?
Yeah. Well, I think it's strong now, but we want to make it continue to be so. And the best way to do that is to put more money back in the hands of the hardworking people of this country. I think lowering payroll taxes would do that. We saw in Wisconsin, when we inherited 8 years ago a $3.6 billion structural deficit. Part of what we did, we put in place major reforms, but another part of it was cutting taxes. We reduced the tax burden on the hardworking people of our state and the employers in our state by over $8 billion. And every one of the 8 years I was in office as governor, we had a surplus. And so I think the two go hand in hand. Sometimes that seems contrary. It's, Art Laffer often is referred to as the Laffer curve in the past. I update it. I call it the Kohl's curve. I shop at Kohl's department stores, and everything there is on sale. And it seems like sometimes I often question if they're paying me to buy their merchandise. But the point I make is that the way many of those retailers like Kohl's make money is through volume. The same thing's true with taxes. You tax high, few people can afford it. You tax low, you put more money back in the hands of consumers, and they put that back into the economy. That actually bodes well. So the two go hand in hand. You can balance budgets and still cut taxes.
Governor, though, if you're going to advocate for lowering taxes, are you also advocating for balancing the budget in any way? I mean, the great conundrum, and we've seen it with this even recent past tax cuts, you may have juiced the economy marginally, and I think it's hard to say actually more than that. But at the same time, clearly, by the CBO's own scoring, we have not received the kind of revenues that were expected. Nor, by the way, did the economy grow at nearly the rate that had been promised.
Well, I think the key is looking at what many of the states, not just Wisconsin, but other states have done. In our case, revenues actually did go up after our tax cuts went in place. In fact, the last year I was governor, there were more people working in Wisconsin than ever before in its history, and unemployment was at or below record lows. So part of it's doing not just tax cuts for the sake of tax cuts, but doing it in a way that puts more money in the hands of consumers, that encourages more wage growth within small businesses and other employers. So I think it's not just about tax cuts. But I do agree with you that balanced budgets are one of those issues that's a bipartisan problem. The national debt nearly doubled under the 8 years of Barack Obama. It had done similar jumps under President George W. Bush. It's now up over $22 trillion. If you look at the Congressional Budget Office projections, by 2025, which sounds like a long ways into the future, but that's less than 5.5 years from now. By 2025, if the trend continues as they project, you're looking at $30 trillion in terms of an overall debt for the federal government. That's actually debt payments over $1 trillion. Think about that. That would be like someone making $46,000 a year, carrying a debt of about $300,000, and worse off, not paying that debt down, but actually adding to it every year. The only way to solve this long term is to enact a balanced budget amendment. And the only way really to do that is not to rely on Washington, but it has to happen in the states. And that's something we're working on right now.
Okay, we got things happening, triple-digit losses now, Governor. We could talk more about the current economy and whether it's an economy that needs a tax cut or doesn't, but we'll have to do that another time. I appreciate your time today, though. Thanks, Governor.